Mark chapter 4, verse 26. The kingdom of God is like this, he said. A man scatters seed on the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day. The seed sprouts and grows, although he doesn't know how. The soil produces a crop by itself, first the blade, then the head, and then the full grain on the head. As soon as the crop is ready, he sends for the sickle because the harvest has come. So Jesus, he shares another parable that is very similar to the one that we previously learned about the sower. But I think the implications, the lesson here is a little bit different. He's telling his disciples that they too will scatter seeds and the kingdom of God will grow, even though they won't know exactly how, right? They will spread the gospel and God will take care of the rest. So all you can do is to plant and to water, but it's really up to God for that life to form and for that life to grow. And so the church will grow. And when the time is right, Jesus will return for the harvest. He will come to take those who have fully grown and matured in the Lord through faith, and he will take them for his own possession. I think a lot of times we spend so much time wondering if the seeds that we sow will amount to anything, if we will ever be able to reap what we sow, if we'll ever be able to see the fruit of our labor in the ministry and the serving that we do for God's kingdom. But really, that's not up to us, right? Whether we get to reap that harvest immediately, or we may never even in our lifetime, that harvesting may happen much later on. But I think what Jesus is saying here is that we should only be concerned about spreading the gospel, sowing those seeds. And we may see little harvests or big harvests in our lifetime, but eventually God will grow this thing so big that there will come that day where there will be that ultimate final harvest where Jesus will return, and he will return for that harvest to take his church up into the heavens, right? To finally have God's people for his own possession. Verse 30, and he said, with what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable can we use to describe it? It's like a mustard seed that when sown upon the soil is the smallest of all the seeds on the ground. And when sown, it comes up and grows taller than all the garden plants and produces large branches so that the birds of the sky can nest in its shade. So the mustard seed was apparently the smallest seed, at least in Jesus' context. But this seed, when planted, would grow to be the largest of all the garden plants. And this plant would usually grow to be about 6 feet tall with very large branches. And the Old Testament uses this metaphor of birds nesting to describe how there's numerous passages where it uses this metaphor, but that's describing how God's kingdom will be like a giant tree that houses people of all nations. And so in the same way, we may plant what seems to be small seeds, right? We may sow seeds for God's kingdom and think, this is never really going to amount to anything, right? The things that I do aren't all that epic, right? Aren't all that great, right? I don't really possess the talents, the gifts, the ability to sow anything great for the kingdom. And so we may plant things that we seem like we feel like are very small. And I think what Jesus is saying is that the things that we sow are visibly small. It's the smallest of all the other seeds in the garden. But when we spread that gospel, right, we will see God move powerfully. And the nature of the way that God moves is always powerfully. And God is always doing things behind the scenes, in the invisible, right? He is always moving powerfully, and in his wisdom, and in his time, he's growing this thing to become Christ's everlasting kingdom, right? So no matter how grim things may seem at times, right? No matter what kinds of tough seasons we go through, ultimately God is establishing Christ's everlasting kingdom that will house believers of all nations, tribes, and tongues, right? God is raising up this mighty oak tree that will be a place for people of all nations, people from all over the world. He is establishing this massive, beautiful, everlasting kingdom of Jesus. No matter where we are in terms of our confidence level, we can always have confidence knowing that this is the work that God's doing through all seasons, through all situations, no matter what we're going through in life. Verse 33, he was speaking the word to them with many parables like these, as they were able to understand. He did not speak to them without a parable. Privately, however, he explained everything to his own disciples. So again, we see the special access the disciples had to Jesus, probably because they would be the first apostles to establish the church, and some of them would eventually become writers of the New Testament. Verse 35, on that day when evening had come, he told them, let's cross over to the other side of the sea. So they left the crowd and took him along, since he was in the boat, and other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. He was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. So they woke him up and said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die? He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, Silence, be still. The wind ceased, and there was a great calm. Then he said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified and asked one another, Who then is this? Even the wind and the sea obey him. So the situation went from a great storm to a great calm. And the disciples went from a great fear to an even greater fear. Though they were afraid for their lives, their faces froze in complete shock as they saw the waves and wind completely and immediately obey Jesus' commands. But Jesus relates these reactions back to faith. The disciples were awake, making sure that they would be able to sail safely throughout the night. They probably saw the storm brewing in the night sky, and they felt the winds picking up and the waves beginning to smack their boat harder and harder. But Jesus was able to sleep because he had faith that God was always in control, no matter how bad things seemed. The disciples were also being taught to have faith and place their livelihood in the hands of God. Prayer point number 1. How are you doing in terms of living for the kingdom? Are you planting kingdom seeds at all? And on the other end of the spectrum, do you trust in yourself or God to grow those seeds? Number 2, do you fully entrust your well-being to God? If not, what keeps you